believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Ricardo Brandes, also known as Ricky Brandes, and a great episode for you today. Today we have Tony Brasunas. He's a journalist, writer, author, and he's on to talk about a lot of topics, a lot of them involving his new book called Red, White, and Blind, The Truth About American Censorship and the Rise of Independent Media. And it's a very fascinating book. And he hits on a lot of different aspects of propaganda, social engineering, and a lot of other things that we expand on. But we don't just talk about his book. We also talk a lot about his personal life, his own personal philosophies, his personal experience with censorship, working at Huffington Post. So we get into all that and much more. So hold on tightly. It's going to be a great conversation that I know you guys are going to enjoy. Now to the business. Of course, as you guys know, this is a value for value show. If you get some value out of these conversations, if you get some value out of the Ripple Effect Podcast, please consider giving some value back. And there's many ways you can do so. Of course, if you're not financially in a good situation, like many of us aren't, because we're dealing with inflation and the rise of food prices and gas prices and all that stuff. But if you're in that situation, there are ways you can help the Ripple Effect Podcast. You can share the show, tell people about the show, rate the show, subscribe to the show on all the platforms I'm on. And you can find all that on the rippleeffectpodcast.com or in the show description. But if you are in a good financial situation, and if you are stopping a cheap ass, like I always say, and consider supporting the show by checking out our merch store, which you can also find on my website and in the show description, or you can go directly to the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com. That URL will bring you directly to the merch store. Get some shirts, some hats, some mugs, some cups, whatever you need. Check out the merch store. I'm sure we have it. If we don't have it, let me know, and I'll try to get it. And the merch store just keeps expanding. Product quality keeps increasing, and shipment speed keeps increasing. So please check out the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com. Also, we have a PayPal account if you want to support us on there. If you want to send a one-time donation, we have a Patreon page if you want to support us monthly. You can also send donations via cryptocurrency. On our website, you'll find those addresses to send that to. We also are on Venmo now. So if you want to do a one-time donation via Venmo, check out the show description or go to the rippleeffectpodcast.com and check out the link there. And then my sponsors. Remember, all my sponsors are people that I respect, people I like, people that I've been using their product for a while prior to becoming a sponsor. So this is all stuff that you can trust, that it's good stuff and it's worth sharing with you guys. And I'll start off with Content Safe. If you're a content creator, if you're a live streamer, YouTuber, TikToker, whatever it may be, and you want to share your videos on many platforms, but you don't have the time to post it on all the platforms, check out Content Safe. The reason why I can get all my videos to all the video platforms that I'm on, and it's many, like Rumble, Band.video, Minds, BitChute, Odyssey, Rockfin, and I can get my videos on all those platforms so quickly, is because of Content Safe. I upload to one location, and they send it to all the platforms for me, so I don't have to individually upload each one, which is awesome. And they also built my website. So thank you, Matt from Content Safe. Let him know you're a listener of this show. He'll definitely hook you up. Another sponsor is the University of Reason, created by Richard Grove. And Richard Grove, if you haven't checked out his podcast, Grand Theft World, please do. And he's been around the alternative media community for a long time, and he created the University of Reason to help educate people, to help people expand on skills, learn new skills, connect with a liberty-minded community. So if you're looking to change careers, if you're looking to learn something new, check out the University of Reason and the autonomy courses. It's helped a lot of people. It's also connected and networked a lot of people together. So please check out the links in the show description. And signing up for the University of Reason and the autonomy courses can help you and it can help me. So it's a win-win situation. The next sponsor is Element. Element is a electrolyte powder mix that you put in your water. It tastes amazing. It's good for you. No sugar. It's keto friendly, fasting friendly. And if you want to add a little flavor to your water and you also want to consume something that is good for you with premium ingredients, check out Element Electrolytes. If you use the link in the show description or on my website, you'll get a free gift with every purchase. And Element was designed and created and founded by Rob Wolf, who is a OG in the paleo and keto community. He's been on my podcast. So has Richard Grove. So has Matt Raymer. So these are all people that I'm friends with, people that I like, people that I've been a fan of before they became a sponsor. And I highly recommend you going in the archives and checking out my interviews with these people so you can learn more about what they do and how they think. But Element Electrolytes tastes awesome. There's tons of amazing flavors. It can help with muscle soreness, fatigue, headaches, and many other symptoms due to dehydration. And when you're fasting or doing keto, maybe you're eating less, maybe you're dieting, maybe it's just really hot outside, or you're too busy to hydrate as much as you should. Element Electrolytes can help with that. So check out Element Electrolytes. Like I said, use the links in the show description, and that goes a long way. The last couple things are check out Rockfin. It's one of the many video platforms I'm on. But the nice thing about Rockfin is if you listen to the Ripple Effect podcast on Rockfin or watch the videos on Rockfin, and they have apps for Androids and Apple phones, so check those out. But if you watch content on Rockfin, they contribute crypto to the content creators. So just by watching and listening to the Ripple Effect podcast on Rockfin, that can help contribute to the show also. So another great way of helping the show. If you like the music you hear in the podcast, check out Theory 6. The song's called The Ripple Effect. It's available anywhere you can get music. You can also find the links on my website and in the show description, so check that out. The last couple of things I want to announce is the Ripple Effect podcast is on Substack. You'll find the links on my website or in the show description, just like everything I've referred to. And you can subscribe to the Ripple Effect podcast on Substack. We also have a Telegram group chat if you want to connect with me or other listeners of the show. Check out the Telegram group chat. We share articles. We talk about different things we're into, different podcasts. I always share links to the Ripple Effect podcast episodes right after they're released on the Telegram group chat. And of course, also check out the Union of the Unwanted, which is the other show I host with Sam Tripoli, Midnight Mike, and Charlie Robinson. We just surpassed 1 million episodes. And if you guys know the origin story of the Union of the Unwanted, originally it didn't have its own RSS feed. We used to just share it on our individual RSS feeds. So it's amazing that with only 50-something episodes, only been around for 2 years roughly, and we already surpassed 1 million downloads on Podbeam, which is pretty cool, I would say. We've had some amazing guests in the past on that show. I'm really proud of it. I know it was just referenced recently on the Jimmy Dore Show by Pasta, who is one of the hosts of AM Wake Up and the Convo Couch and a regular on the Union of the Unwanted. And also one of our co-hosts have been on Joe Rogan recently too, Sam Tripoli. So it's pretty cool. The show's growing. Hopefully it keeps on growing. It's a way of connecting a lot of people in the alternative media community. We have researchers, doctors, historians, so many different people on the show. So please check out the Union of the Unwanted. You can watch it on Rockfin and on Odyssey, and you can listen to it on all the audio platforms. So that's it, guys. Enjoy this amazing conversation with Tony, and I'll talk to you guys on the next one. Peace. Let people know who Tony is.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Ricky, so much for having me on. I'm really honored to be here. So yeah, looking forward to the conversation. Yeah, so I mean, for me, I could go back and start my story. I spent some time in China right after college, teaching English there and backpacking. That's the subject of my first book, Double Happiness, and we could get into that. And then after that, I was back. I lived in San Francisco for a while. I was active in local politics there quite a bit. I was doing some writing. I think for the sake of Red, White, and Blind and my newest book that's just about to come out here in a couple months, probably the best place to start the story is in 2016. I was at the time writing for Huffington Post, covering the Democratic primary from more the Bernie Sanders perspective, which made my coverage a little bit unusual. It was definitely not the dominant perspective at that time in the mainstream media. And I wrote quite a bit, and a lot of my articles were, perhaps because the coverage was a little more rare, reached 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 views and reached the front page of Huffington Post on occasion. And things were going fine. Obviously it was a very momentous primary, a lot of ups and downs. I wrote about a number of different aspects that came up. And until just a week before the primary, the convention, which was in Philadelphia that year in July of 2016, when I published an article on Huffington Post at night. It was about basically, look, we're getting close to the convention here. Neither Bernie Sanders nor Hillary Clinton has a clear majority of the delegates. It's going to be up to the super delegates, which are these people, the party bigwigs that get to vote for an equivalent of 10,000 voters. They get to cast a vote. And I wrote this article saying, look, because of some of the reasons that voters, independent voters in particular, don't trust Hillary Clinton, it's probably a safer bet to go with Bernie Sanders. Trump at that point had won the Republican nomination. Head-to-head polling showed Bernie Sanders doing better. So I wrote that article basically saying we should, I'm on my way to the convention. It'd be great for the superdelegates to go with Bernie Sanders' better chance of winning in November. And then that article was pulled down. I woke up the next morning, the article was gone. It had been censored by some editors somewhere at Huffington Post. And so that experience really was the beginning of what has turned into Red, White, and Blind, this book looking at censorship, disinformation, propaganda in the United States, particularly in corporate media, and also the rise of independent media and shows like yours.
Awesome. So prior to that experience, what was your worldview on media, on websites like, HuffPost, and did you not experience a lot of censorship? So was it kind of a new thing to you, or were you aware it existed, but you just weren't dealing with it? I mean, that experience itself, did it change your worldview, or did you kind of already know things like this happened prior?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was naive and that it was like completely a bolt out of the blue. I had actually started a political magazine when I was in San Francisco in the early 2000s called Garlic and Grass, and one of the issues we did was looking at the media, and we definitely looked closely at media consolidation and at voices that were not being heard. So yeah, I knew about it as a sort of abstract idea. I knew it was a problem. I knew that we were losing voices every year based on media consolidation, and 10 corporations becoming 8, 7, 6, 5 that controlled the media. But it was definitely a different kind of experience to have it happen to me personally and to experience it how it happened. It definitely changed my perspective on it enough that I think I had, going into that experience, already a lot of interest and a lot of concerns about media bias in terms of how politics and current events were covered. Having that experience of direct censorship, I think, kicked me off into like, this is the thing I want to focus on in the next 5 years of my life, rather than just this is one of many issues.
Yeah, and I feel like it's only ramped up even more since your experience. Like, it's become more obvious, and it's weird. The thing about the media is that I always have this perspective that people, even if they know that it's bias, or they're the way they're telling the story is for a purpose of affecting and molding your perspective of the story. They're not just concerned about giving you the information. They're much more concerned on what information to give you and how to give it to you, so they can have an influence on how you see things. And but even though we know that's all happening, it's almost like pro wrestling or a soap opera or a Netflix series. It's like, if you watch enough of it, you'll get caught up in the storyline, and you almost forget it's fake. You will end up rooting for somebody or against somebody else, or you'll end up picking a team, and you can't help it because we're these emotional creatures that eventually, will like someone more than somebody else, so you root for the underdog or you root for this guy. So it's the thing about Trump when he was running is or when he became president, I mean, he didn't expose anything that we didn't already know. We knew that a lot of media was biased and were picking teams and trying to they were asking like got you questions where they could end up creating a headline out of it. But he almost chose not to play it, play that game where like previously, if you're Obama, if you're Bush, whoever you may be, you knew there were certain reporters that were going to try to give you questions to get you to stumble or mess up or whatever, and you would just play along. But Trump was kind of the first president that's like, I'm not playing along. I'm just gonna, be ridiculous and call you fake news and and not play this game. So a lot of people, it was weird because it's like that little act for some reason made everybody believe that the media was like being exposed more than it has been in the past. It's like, no, he didn't change anything. Like these things were going on previously. He just kind of pointed it out. And and then during like the whole COVID stuff, like do you feel like anything has changed? Am I wrong in the way I'm seeing this? Do you feel like these issues have always existed and they haven't really been amplified that much? Maybe to some extent, I think during the COVID lockdown, I got kicked off YouTube. Many people got kicked off YouTube and were being censored on Twitter and Facebook. So I think that definitely ramped up then. But do you think it's getting worse? Do you see like trends that is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Like, and I guess I'll simplify my very long question. One, do you think that things have gotten much worse, or do you think they've just gotten much more obvious? And two, is there a light in the end of the tunnel? Do you think that because of all the censorship, it's opening the door for companies like Rumble and Rockfin and all these other alternative social media platforms to grow, and maybe it's a good thing?
Wow, well, great questions. In fact, those questions are so good, it would take me a book to answer them, and that's the book that I've written. Yeah, so let's see. So your two questions, if I can restate it, are: have things changed significantly in the last 5 years? And where are we going from here? What's the light at the end of the tunnel? Right, so let me take those. So the first question, absolutely, things have changed. And so in addition to the censorship I experienced at Huffington Post, which was not, I would say in the grand scheme of the American media landscape, not some huge out of the ordinary thing. I mean, in writing my book, I learned that it's happened to many, many people with far bigger names and more credentials than I have. So, but it has happened more over the last 10, 15 years. And then even more over the last 5 years. The other thing that shifted really at that same time in 2016, which probably played as big a role in me writing Red, White, and Blind as my own personal censorship, was the birth of this being used as a way to silence people. The term fake news was basically not used. You almost never heard that term prior to 2016. And suddenly, and I write about this really early on in the book when I'm covering 2016 and Bernie and Hillary and then Donald Trump. Suddenly out of nowhere, this term fake news starts appearing around September or October, right before the election. And after the election, it was everywhere. Everything was about fake news. Fake news was the reason that Trump had won. Fake news was the reason that people liked Bernie Sanders, and it was from Russians, or it was like these memes. It was this whole thing. It was suddenly this huge thing that hadn't existed before. It was this new problem. And now what's really interesting to get to what you just said is like, how did Trump play the game differently? And in some ways, I wouldn't say he didn't play the game. I think he played the game a little differently, which is what some people loved and some people hated. I think it threw some people off, and I think it made some people pay attention. The first way he did that was exactly around this term fake news. So the term fake news came out. It was used basically to say this is one of the reasons that Trump won in this sort of mainstream corporate media, which, and I distinguish red news and blue news in the book, like sort of Republican leaning and Democrat leaning. But in like places like CNN, New York Times, NPR, which are Democrat-leaning corporate mainstream media, the term fake news was used to try to label independent media that had been in favor of Bernie Sanders or in favor of Donald Trump. So I was kind of included in that. I mean, Huffington Post isn't really alternative media, it's internet media, but I was one of the few people writing from Bernie Sanders' perspective. So I was kind of in the gray area around that. And so as that term was being used to try to minimize these alternative viewpoints, what Trump did was very interesting, is he turned the phrase around and lobbed it back at them and said, you're the fake news. CNN is fake news. New York Times is fake news. And he did in a way that, some people liked, some people didn't, right? Trump is a polarizing figure. I think he caters to that. I think he tries to be polarizing. He uses phrases like, what was the phrase that he used? I can't remember now. When in communist countries and dictatorships, they've called the enemy of the people. He called CNN and New York Times an enemy of the people, which was a particularly polarizing comment, because that's a phrase used in authoritarian countries, and they're the people that were saying Trump is going to be this authoritarian dictator, and he's gonna, he's a secret white supremacist, fascist, and so by using that term, he actually polarized things even more than he needed to, and Trump does that. But no, so that term fake news came, and that really has switched things and made things much more intense around media. And then we went into COVID, and we went into the whole pandemic. And yes, while writing this book, these terms that I talk about and these things I are investigating ramped up like probably 100%. I mean, all of it got twice as much. There was way more censorship, way more bias, way more disinformation. And they changed the terms from fake news, since that term had kind of been used both ways. And now they use the terms disinformation, misinformation, which basically have the same meaning. They're just trying to discredit media narratives that they don't control, is the use of those terms. So yeah, so that's to answer your first question, I would say, is that things have changed in a significant degree, particularly after the Trump election, and then also even more so in 2020, 2021, and 2022 with the disinformation and the manipulation of the news around COVID, the pandemic, and also the 2020 election and all of that. So that's my answer to your first question. Let me take a sip of water and I'll get into the second one.
Yeah, I've had Mickey Willis on the show, who did the pandemic documentary. The extent that they went to make sure that that nobody could watch that film was insane. I mean, they're going in people's personal cloud accounts. They were just taking down websites that was posting it. I mean, it was insane. And the crazy thing is, YouTube would let you watch the film as long as somebody was trying to debunk it and that they were narrating either over it or between scenes. So it's like, it's not too dangerous to watch. It was just too dangerous to watch and come to my own conclusion and make up my own mind. As long as I had somebody influencing my perspective in one direction or another, then that was okay. And when you look at, like, obviously Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent and the work of Edward Bernays, and these are things that people have understood for a long time, that you can subconsciously, indirectly affect the way people look at things and the way they decide, and big tech has that power, right? And I think you went to Amherst for a little bit. I just had Dr. Robert Epstein on, and he's a Harvard PhD also, and psychologist, and he who I think he was taught under Skinner, but either way, he talks about the extent of big tech, and he's been on the Rogan podcast also. And I mean, the power that they have to mold and shape the way we look at things, and all the statistics and psychologists and scientists that are observing and analyzing all our information, all our metadata, all our trends, all the things we like, dislike, every move we make, recording everything, and then taking that information and understanding how to manipulate us. I mean, it's scary, and so we think like media can do that. They can sell us on a story. They can maybe suppress some information and then give us other information to lean us in one direction or another, or to help push one opinion or the other. but big tech is hand in hand with them. I mean, they're contributing, if not um, just contributing. They're even worse in many cases.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, propaganda and the ability, like you mentioned, Edward Bernays, you mentioned Noam Chomsky. Yeah, the ability to manipulate information and to manipulate people's opinions about things through the use of propaganda has reached a high art form at this point. I have one chapter of the book looks at the last 100 years, or actually, I start really with the founding of the country, and I look at the Enlightenment and stuff like that a little bit, but bring it all the way up. And I think when we look back at this time, we're not going to call the last 100 years like the age of information. I think we'll call it the age of propaganda, because it was the growth, the birth of propaganda was in the 1920s with Edward Bernays and his work in the First World War, basically selling the war to the American people. And then he basically birthed the public relations industry along with Walter Lippmann. And he's famous for convincing people all kinds of things, like that they wanted to eat more bananas, that the color green was a great color, that women were cool if they smoked cigarettes. I mean, there are all of these things, and he basically just he got it to a science. His uncle was Sigmund Freud, so it wasn't probably an accident that he knew some of the advanced psychology stuff. And so that was the beginning of it, and it's only grown and grown more sophisticated over the last 100 years. Now, Edward Bernays is a really interesting character because he was kind of a true believer. He has all these quotes where he says things like, you know, the American people's mentality is ruled by a hidden group of men. And so these quotes are used to make it sound like he's this sort of conspiracy theorist, but he's actually, and I get into why I don't like to use that phrase in very many ways, but I'm using it in this case. But he was a true believer. He actually thought that it was very important for the country to have sort of one set viewpoint on things in order to mold the nation into this like powerful country. And so he sort of justified in his own mind that public relations was a good thing. Now, we all probably rationalize to some extent the way that we make our money if we're in any way suspicious that the money we make is not for the greater good of humanity. And I'm sure he did that. But it's just he's a really interesting character. And so I'm glad you brought up Edward Bernays. I definitely talk about him in Red, White, and Blind. And then, yeah, I bring it up so we go through the Operation Mockingbird era. And that's the era in which, the CIA was manipulating the media by placing agents at mainstream publications and also recruiting existing journalists into to work for the CIA. And then Noam Chomsky, who's, and what's his co-author's name? Herman. They wrote their book, Manufacturing Consent, in the late 70s, I think, or early 80s. And I sort of build on their model because I think some elements of their model really still is very valuable, although they missed a few things that I really get into in my book. In addition to what I call systemic bias, what they identify as their sort of lenses of the media. I talk about in my book 3 kinds of bias that are affecting the media today. So there's systemic bias, which is the different kinds of biases that an organization has based on its ownership, based on the advertisers, what the advertisers want, based on they don't want to piss off elite sources because they might need a quote from Fauci a week from Tuesday, so they don't want to say something mean about him on Monday. That's all systemic bias. Then we have nefarious bias, which is the one that people are interested to try to understand. That's the more Operation Mockingbird, like deliberate nefarious manipulation with a hidden agenda. And then the third kind of bias is what I call innocent bias. And that's just the bias that we all have based on our upbringing, based on our, race, class, gender, sexual orientation, country of origin, all that kind of stuff. We all do have a bias. And so it's important to understand all 3 biases and how they play out together, because where I go with the book is into this, your earlier question, where do we go from here? Like, what's the light at the end of the tunnel? And what I propose is a balanced media diet. And I review 40 different sources of news and sort of compose this balanced media diet. And the idea is to balance the different biases you're getting in the news that you consume.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the thing is, the more you research this stuff, and when I I went down this rabbit hole a long time ago, and you almost get to a point where you feel like everything is just a illusion. It's like that movie Network. It's like uh from the what was the late 70s. It's like the tube's gonna tell, they would talk about the television and they'd be like, oh, the tube's gonna tell you how to dress and what to eat, and all the and then it's like they could foresee this issue. I mean, I don't think anybody could foresee the extent of it, but without a doubt, I mean, it's almost, you almost feel like that it's an unfair battle because you have all these uh agendas that are influencing what we're seeing, what we're hearing, all this stuff. And to the average person, they're just listening and buying products and watching commercials, not knowing that there's all this psychology behind the scenes in what they're seeing and what they're hearing and all those things. And that's why it's kind of scary, because when you think about like kids that are coming up in in today's era, you're being force fed specific opinions. You're not letting people hear all opinions, right? Like, I'm sure you know who Andrew Tate is, and he recently was just on Valuetainment with Patrick Bet David, and I honestly, people for a while now are like, oh, have you heard Andrew Tate? I'm like, nah, he doesn't seem that interesting to me. I'm like, I'm like, I don't know, he didn't, for some reason he just didn't spark my interest that much. And I'm like, okay, he's a kickboxer. I'm like, okay, I'm like, it's just not, but for whatever reason, he blew up. And I think he blew up because he was defending people that are basically almost looked at like, or they're dismissed. Like, if you're a young white guy, straight white guy, like you're kind of like don't seem or feel that important right now, because a lot of the world issues are blamed on us, and not that I'm that young, but you kind of get what I mean. But regardless,
Well, I think we're more blamed if we're older, actually.
yeah, you're kind of right, yeah. But the fact that he's just been censored everywhere, and this goes into what you're saying, like he just got kicked off every platform. And if you listen to his interview, he talked about how like Uber, I mean, banks, everybody together all at once banned him off everything. Like he couldn't get a Uber. Like everybody just didn't, like it was collusion to the highest levels where he didn't, banks were saying they can't do business with him anymore. His Twitter account, Instagram, everything just dropped and disappeared. And it's like, it's wild. And it's like, okay, why? Because you disagree with him? Like you fight bad ideas with good ideas, and you let people listen to all these ideas. And you know what? Like, it's like that saying, a broken clock's right twice. Like, he makes sense. Like he says stuff that makes sense. Does he say some things I disagree with? Yes. But never should anybody be censored because people disagree with him. And if anything, I only listened to that interview that he did because he's been censored. Like he became the forbidden fruit. He became, his ideas became sexier to me because now he's banned everywhere. And I'm like, okay, well, I gotta see what this guy thinks and what he believes in his own personal philosophies and what is causing all this trouble, So in many cases, sometimes it's almost counterproductive. It only makes the person seem like I said, like almost like the forbidden fruit, like people are more intrigued with it. And it also, if his ideas are bad, and if he has some bad ideas and some ridiculous philosophies, then letting people hear those things is the best way for people to come to the conclusion that he's not making sense, or he has dangerous ideas or whatever, So it's
I totally agree with you. And I think that censorship, I mean, one of the things I really wrestle with in Red, White, and Blind is censorship. And I think we have a lot of issues in our society right now, a lot of things to deal with. There's, we could make a laundry list, but I think censorship is one of the ones that is absolutely anathema to our entire system, and not just our system of government, but our system of science. I would say all of the values of Western civilization, going back to the Enlightenment, going back to the French Revolution and the American Revolution, they're founded on this idea of the free exchange of ideas, right? The first Enlightenment, like what that did is that broke apart the power of the feudal system and the Catholic Church to basically say, no, the Earth is in the center of the galaxy. No, we're the only way to like everlasting life. We have the truth. Everything else is wrong. It was breaking apart that basically birthed this country and birthed, the French Revolution, and all of this, all of modern science, modern democracy came about through that. And I say the invention of the printing press really sort of birthed that. And so censorship, the ability to shut down ideas, is anathema to our entire system, and we absolutely have to oppose it. Yeah, Andrew Tate, I don't know much about the guy, but from what I've heard, there's no reason to censor him. I haven't heard anything. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right that if we go down this path of this idea of like the internet death penalty, right, which is where you get completely banned, and not just one channel decides, okay, YouTube or maybe Twitter says, yeah, you said something that we don't like, but that you can get axed instantly from all of them is very scary. It certainly is it is a very dark and dire sign. And so I do wrestle with in my book, like, does censorship work? Like, let's say they really want to silence somebody who disagrees with this sort of larger agenda that is in the interest of some small group. And so censorship does work sometimes. We have to admit that and acknowledge that sometimes somebody is just gone. And it's really dangerous, and it's bad for science. It's bad for democracy. Innovation happens on the edges. So if you start censoring the edges, you end up dooming your society to no further innovation, and that's death. And that is a path that we may be down, and I think it's important to be aware of that. On the other hand, you brought up something that I also talk about that I think is really important, which I call it the Barbara Streisand effect. I mean, I borrowed this from somewhere, where Barbara Streisand, I don't know if you heard this, if you remember this, there was like, she had been like preaching to somebody about how we have to live more simple lives. And then somebody had taken a photo of this brand new mansion she built in like Malibu with like this huge, and they put the photo and it got shared around on social media a little bit, and people were like, oh, she's a hypocrite. And so rather than just let it go and just like allow the fact that maybe, one tiny percent of the population was going to think she was a hypocrite, she tried to get this photo banned. So she went and she tried to like go after this photo. And then suddenly now it's like everybody, oh, where's this photo that Barbara Streisand doesn't want people to see? And so what it does is it triggers this part of human nature that I think is very salutary in this world of censorship, which is we want to know the thing we're not supposed to know. We want to know the thing that is, like you were just saying, it becomes sexier. It becomes the forbidden fruit. It becomes whatever it is. And so because of that, I think that happened with my article that I wrote before the Democratic Convention. That article, I arrived in Philadelphia, and the article had been hidden, had been like copied and pasted on Reddit. And then I eventually copied it and pasted it on my Medium account and put it on Twitter. And it ended up becoming my most read article that year. And it was the one that Huffington Post had censored, right? So there's something real about that, where censorship does not work, and censorship actually amplifies someone's voice. Like, we could get into what's happened with Alex Jones, or we could get into what's happened with some of the other people that have been banned and censored, and some of them have gone on to bigger and better things. And sometimes for smaller people, smaller names, maybe me, we'll see what happens. Censorship works, in the darkest sense of it. And so, yeah, I think we have to take a stand against censorship. And when people talk about free speech, they have to realize that free speech is not supporting speech you agree with. That's the kind of free speech that Mao liked, and that Hitler liked, and that Stalin supported. Noam Chomsky has a really great quote about this. He says, free speech is precisely supporting speech that you despise or are disgusted by. That means you are supporting free speech if you support somebody's ability to say something that you completely disagree with, and you might even think is dangerous or disgusting. We already have in our law traditions two exceptions. You can't say fire in a crowded movie theater, right? So you can't directly incite violence. You can't get on Twitter and say, let's all go kill Tony or something like that. And you can't libel somebody's character. You can't deliberately say false things about them to reduce, or impugn reputation. So when people talk free speech absolutism, I think it's a bullshit term. You're either for free speech or you're not. There's no absolutism. It's like you're either for murder or you're not, right? There's no like, you're kind of for it sometimes. There's no free speech absolutism. You're either for free speech, which means you support people saying things that you're disgusted by. And there's these carve outs for inciting violence and slander. Or you're not for free speech and you think that only people should be able to say things that you agree with and things that you think are safe and that you think like that don't like tread on your precious values and like don't accidentally like hurt somebody's feelings. That's not free speech. That's supporting something other than free speech. That's supporting censorship. So
I feel like
yeah, I think censorship is dangerous. I think it's important. And I'll say one last thing on this topic, which is good news. So there's some bad news, but the good news is I think that we're winning. I think that what's happening is we're going into a second enlightenment. And I talk about this in the last 2 chapters of the book. I think we're going into a new enlightenment. And what's the cause of that enlightenment this time is the internet, right? The first enlightenment that I just talked about birthed the printing press, birthed the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, the United States of America, the French Republic, democracy, science, all of that. And it completely disrupted and eventually destroyed the power structures of the Catholic Church, feudalism, all of that top-down distribution of information, right? If we say it's true, it's true. If you don't say it's true, it's fake news. The words they used then were heretic and blasphemer and the Inquisition, and you're going on the rack. So today we're in a similar phase, I think, and this is what gives me optimism, is the internet has, like the printing press, has dramatically, sort of mind-bendingly, largely, I can't even put words on it, dramatically changed our ability to share information with each other, like the printing press did then. Suddenly, you and I can have this conversation, and people can listen to it and be persuaded or not persuaded, but there's no intermediary. We didn't need CNN or ABC or Donald Trump or Tony Fauci to say it's okay to have this conversation. You can listen to it, right? We're having this conversation directly. We can then upload it, and 100, 1,000, a million, a billion people can check it out on the internet, right? And so what that's doing is that's completely changing the way information is shared. We're again disrupting a top-down distribution of information. And now with the birth of independent media, shows like yours, shows like some of the other shows I've been on, my book, people are publishing things on their own. And that's only going to continue. And I think the reason that this term fake news was weaponized and used in 2016, 2017, and that now we have misinformation, disinformation being weaponized similarly, is because they see this happening. It's not an accident. They see that independent media is starting to win. Trust in the corporate media is declining, declining, declining. And so they're dinosaurs that are dying. They're realizing, NPR, the New York Times, also Fox, CNN, they're recognizing that they're losing control of the narrative, of the story that we believe about the world. And that's what terrifies them, because that's their most powerful asset. So I think we're moving into a new enlightenment, and it's what gives me a lot of hope.
Well, this brings up an interesting question, because another person who's been censored that I'm a fan of in regards to just intrigued with his philosophies and writings is Alexander Dugin. And Alexander Dugin's one of those people that doing research on Alexander Dugin and Leo Strauss and other thinkers that are like-minded or have influenced each other, they have a very different look of they have a very different perspective on the Enlightenment, right? Like, so typically you hear people discuss it as like the positives that came out of it, but and I think this originated from Leo Strauss, but they have this idea that it actually caused a lot of our current issues in regards to, so like the pros and cons are, some of the pros are the things you discuss, but some of the cons are you are now less spiritual. You now, it's almost like you sparked materialism and this idea of like, okay, we used to look at the world in a spiritual way, believe in supernatural things, believe that we didn't understand everything, we didn't understand how the world worked or whatnot, and then the Enlightenment kind of said, hey, now we're taking the power away from maybe organized religion or the church or whatever, but we're putting it now into a new religion, which is scientism, and these experts who now they say they have truth with a capital T. And now they say that, like the same way that the priests would say, this is truth, this is the way the world works. Now they're doing the same thing, and we're transitioning in that direction, and a lot of loss of community, loss of purpose, loss of curiosity of these bigger questions of like, why are we here? Is it important to be a good person? Is it important to have community? That some of this can be contributed to the Enlightenment. Does that make any sense to you? And do you subscribe to any of that?
No, that's a great point. No, I think that's right. There is a reason to be. The criticism of the Enlightenment, right, is that it sort of took us out of this sort of natural world and put us in this place of like science and rationality. And I think it's totally fair to critique it from that standpoint. But I think if you really lay it down and you look at it, you're going to say that the Enlightenment was absolutely fabulously beneficial. You could do the same with technology, right? You could say, on the one hand, wouldn't it be better if we didn't have cars and didn't have phones and didn't have, glass or something, right? But then you have to realize, okay, so then we can't have this conversation, right? You can't probably get on an airplane, all these things. You have to lay aside so many things. I think it's easy in a sense to stand back and say, oh, I wish we didn't have technology. And you're putting that on your Twitter feed or something, right? Or, you're eating pineapples and you live in Connecticut. It's like, it's easy to say things like that, or say, oh, I wish we never had the Enlightenment, because then we'd all be like spiritual beings living with nymphs in the forest. The truth is, I mean, if you actually go back and look at that, I mean, life was really, really hard for people in feudalism. Most people had a really, really hard life. Both men to think clearly, the ability to have science and to be able to rationally come to our own conclusions and be able to think clearly and use the scientific method. No, there were tremendous benefits to humanity and tremendous benefits to us all. It doesn't mean it's the last word. I don't think like, this Enlightenment should be like the last one. And I don't think that, just the Enlightenment means it satisfies all things for all people. Like there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And you have at the very base is this need of just like protection and warmth and food. And then you go up through sort of like, different levels of love and connection. And then eventually you have sort of like transformation and human realization of potential. So I don't think the Enlightenment like gets us to the top of the pyramid, but it's definitely helpful at getting us up several rungs. And so I would say the same with technology. I mean, I think it's very good and healthy to critique technology. Not all technology is good. Would it be better if we didn't have nuclear bombs and atom bombs? Like, yeah, it'd probably be better, but then, there would be a whole bunch of other things we'd have to let go of. So I think it's a fair critique of the Enlightenment. And when people say that, but I don't think you can just sort of draw this alternative path that would have happened if we hadn't had an Enlightenment, that we would have gone into this like paradise where everybody's sort of back in Eden, or something like that. I don't totally get that. So I think that the Enlightenment and how I use that term is, no, a new Enlightenment will be a very powerful, beneficial thing. And I think it's already unfolding. I think what you brought up, your other critique point, was this idea that there's scientism and it's like the new religion. And you have these new like priests and bishops like Fauci and like, the various people in the current government. And I think that's a different criticism. That's saying we're getting back to, that's meaning we're rolling back to before the first Enlightenment. I think there is a real danger of that basically if we let go of, if we give into censorship and we let go of democracy and we let go of science, because science is not a set of truths. Science is not a set of rules. Science is a method. Science is a way of looking at the world and saying, here's my theory, or here's my observations. The sun rises, or the sky is blue, or I have a headache. And then here's my theories. I think that this is happening. And then you observe it and you look at your theories and you hold on to a theory if it best explains the evidence. And then you set it aside if it doesn't explain the evidence or there's a better theory that comes along. That is science. And that we absolutely need that. And I think we let go of a lot of that during the pandemic, where suddenly it wasn't like, I mean, one of the very first things I look at in the book, I look at Jeffrey Epstein, and then I look at the origin of COVID, just to sort of really take people into why, first of all, to see that the media is distorted, but then also to look at why. So a couple of we look at that. We also look at some of the stuff around the elections. But yeah, that second one, like we really get into the origin of COVID. So why was it that for an entire year you weren't allowed to ask where did COVID come from? Where did SARS-CoV-2? Where is the origin of this virus? Right? We weren't following science. We were following pre-Enlightenment thinking. Trust the experts. Trust there's a priest, and what they say is true. And this priest says, I mean, Anthony Fauci got up there and said, it's preposterous. He used the word, it's a preposterous leap to say that this virus could originate in a lab. Now he's changed his tune several times since then, but that was, and when he said, if you disagree with me, you disagree with science itself. That's not science, right? That's also rolling back to pre-Enlightenment. So what we want to do is we want to get back to the original Enlightenment and then really move forward into this new Enlightenment, which is happening with the birth of independent media, where now we're even moving a step beyond the last Enlightenment, which replaced sort of top-down distribution of information from priests in the feudal system into this sort of media system that we call the professional objective media model, which lasted for about 100 years up until media consolidation kind of got rid of it. There's still some people think that there's this idea of objective journalism that we should celebrate that exists somewhere, and it doesn't. It's like Santa Claus. There's no objective journalism. Everybody has their biases, and they have systemic bias and nefarious bias as well if they work at large institutions. So we're moving into a world that's a little bit more like when the country was founded, when there were dozens and dozens of newspapers and voices, and every voice had its own opinion. Nobody thought that anybody was unbiased. Everybody knew everybody had an axe to grind. But in order to figure things out, you would go and talk to different people and you'd read different sources. And that's what democracy and science thrives in. It thrives in lots of voices, lots of ideas, hurly-burly. You might get things wrong sometimes. You might get lied to, right? That's going to happen. But right, the remedy to bad information is more information. So then you're listening to somebody say, no, SARS-CoV-2, it originated in this wet market where like people were eating raccoons. And you're like, okay, that's a theory. I'm not sure that that's true. There's this other theory. It came out of this lab, and it just so happens that the most advanced virus lab in China is in Wuhan, just down the street from the wet market. And they were experimenting with coronaviruses that came out of bats, and they were doing gain-of-function research, and it was funded by, the NIH. And so maybe that's where it came from. Okay, here's another theory. Is there a good theory, a bad theory? I don't know. Let's have it out. Let's have some scientists. Let's have some not scientists. We're all scientists. Let's have some total laymen give their opinion. And everybody gets to have a voice. Nobody gets censored unless they're actually inciting violence, which nobody's going to do on a topic like that, I don't think. That's what we want. And so moving into the new Enlightenment, it's even more people get to have a say. It's the whole world gets to have a say. And so I think it's a positive thing. But yeah, the forces on the other side are arrayed as well that want to centralize power and want to implement further censorship. I think we're seeing that.
Yeah, and you know what? The media being slanted one way or the other, like if one newspaper leans this way or one journalist leans that way, I'm okay with that. Like you said, we've kind of always understood that. And what you would do is that you would kind of look at all the information, filter out the stuff that doesn't make sense and keep the stuff that does make sense. And a lot of times intentions aren't pure. Like there might be somebody who uncovers some Republican scandal, not because they're this, superhero that's just trying to uncover scandals, but maybe they're left-leaning, maybe they're a socialist, maybe they're a Democrat, maybe they're, and they just want to make the other ones look bad. So maybe morally they're, they don't have the perfect compass, but it doesn't mean you dismiss the information, right? And it goes both ways. Like somebody on the right might expose somebody on the left, maybe just because they're on the left, and maybe the person on the right's equally as bad, but it doesn't mean that you dismiss the information. So a lot of times people would share articles, and especially even during COVID time, but even prior to COVID time, this was always an issue where you would share something and people would be like, oh, but he's right-leaning, I can't trust him, or he's left-leaning, I can't trust him, or they're right-leaning, or they're left-leaning, and it's like, okay, can we just look at the information? Because if you send me something and it's well-researched, it was, the information makes sense, then just because they have another agenda in regards to like, who they want to expose and maybe who they don't expose, it doesn't mean that like that can't be useful information to help me better understand how the world works and what's going on. So yeah, like this idea of like this right down the middle illusion that people who are investigating stuff and newspapers, like none of them have opinions, and if they do, it doesn't ever come into play or have any influence in what they post or what they write about is just silly, like every journalist. And same thing with big tech, right? It was same idea, like, oh, they have fact checkers, or they have this, or they're just censoring this type of information. It's like, well, that's all run by people and decided by people. Somebody has to hit the delete button. Somebody has to make the decision that they're going to ban or censor somebody. And those people have opinions, and those people have perspectives. And those perspectives, even if they try their best not to let it influence their decision making, it has to have some influence, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When I do get into this notion of objective professional journalism and that model that was basically invented by the Rockefeller family. The Rockefellers that were upset because their Standard Oil monopoly was exposed by investigative journalism, and so they founded the original journalism schools and came up with this idea that we'll have objective, fair, and fact-based. We don't need to have all these other sources. Each city can just have one newspaper, and we can get rid of all the other newspapers, or I can buy them up, and it's not an antitrust thing. And so that's what happened. So that really birthed 100 years of media consolidation, was this idea that if you just had one source and it was a professional journalist, that that would be enough for democracy. And I'm not saying objectivity is bad. Objectivity is great. I mean, if you're a writer and you can objectively think about things and you can talk to both sides and get a balanced media diet, and you're much more likely to get to the truth of things, and people will notice that, and people will follow you more. So objectivity is great. But what I'm saying is you can't rely on the professional model of journalism that is going to give us objectivity. It's not. It's going to give us the biases of the organization that hires that journalist, right? So that's going to be systemic bias and potentially nefarious bias, right? So I'm just saying, open our eyes to that's what I'm calling Santa Claus. It's the idea that the New York Times hired that person, so they must be objective, or Fox News has that person on the air, so she must be objective, right? That's just not true. And we know that now, I think. But yeah, I mean, in terms of our political persuasion, I mean, I'm a political independent, but when I talk to people, they're always trying to sort of, well, you haven't, and some don't, but a lot of people try to sort of push me and pull me and say, okay, is this person, on the blue side or the red side? Is he agreeing with me or disagreeing with me? And yeah, I love what you said. I mean, I think if you can look at the information that the person puts together and consider that, rather than, does this person, say nice things to his wife, or whatever, or does he vote the way I like, or does he, smell funny, or does he, eat the right food? I mean, all those things, let that go. Let that be on a side, and take a look at what's the actual information, what's the quality of the research that this person has done. And yeah, that's really what we need. And I think as we enter this new enlightenment, as this unfolds, I think that's what's going to happen, is you're going to see more and more of the people that are doing quality work, they rise. Like somebody like Joe Rogan, it's not just an accident that he happens to be followed by millions of people. It's because he does a good job. Some people think, oh, if you're a journalist or something, you shouldn't be smoking pot or drinking whiskey, in front of you. Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should. Who cares? Like, if he does a good job, if he has good interviews, if he has interesting people are going to follow that, right? And I'm not saying I agree with everything Joe Rogan does. I don't. And I don't agree with what anybody says or does, right? I don't agree with anybody. I even agree with myself all the time. But yeah, I think to the extent that you can look at the quality of the work, the quality of the reporting, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, and whether they're trying to expose somebody that is of their same party or a different party, take a look at the quality of the work. And I think that's where we're going. And those are the kinds of news sources that we're going to want to pull together. And that's what I did with the balanced media diet in Red, White, and Blind, is I looked at the news sources that I think offer the best. They do have their biases, everyone does, but to the extent you can understand the biases and pull them together, you can get closer to understanding the truth about the world and not live in a bubble of just people that agree with you on, a handful of issues.
Yeah, and that's really important. I mean, the idea of just looking at the information, acknowledge if it makes sense, if it doesn't make sense, if it's accurate, if it's not accurate, and put some of the other stuff aside. Because, like you said, so often we're talking to somebody and we're trying to figure out, are they on my team? Like, let me ask some questions so I can figure out if you're my teammate or if you're my enemy. And it's like I think a lot of us are politically homeless, because uh, I love what you're saying because I'm the same way. I don't agree with anybody all the time. Like I remember when COVID first happened, my brother knows that I'm when I first started my podcast in 2013, Rogan was a big inspiration and with the way I have my podcast, the format of my podcast, the type of guests that I have on, we had a lot of similarities. So I wanted to kind of it's like anybody when you first start playing music, you end up before you find your own voice and style, you end up trying to create something that sounds like bands that you like and you listen to. If you're a comedian, you end up adopting the style of the comedians you like. If you're a podcaster, sometimes you adopt some things you like from podcasters that you like. And I remember my brother saying, Rogan, he's taking this seriously, blah blah, and he had that doctor on early on that just fear mongered and scared the shit out of everybody. But he's like, oh, and it was weird because like I looked at him and I'm just like, I don't get it. Like you think because I like somebody or I agree with somebody most of the time that I should always agree with him? Like I can't disagree with him, or because I like him in all these other topics and subjects we agree, and I like his opinions on all these things that all of a sudden like I have to consider, you know, uh that I could be wrong just because somebody I like thinks I'm wrong. Like so it was one of those things you put it in perspective, like, okay, there's some people who truly will be swayed in one way or another just because of people that they respect. You get this idea that like, okay, I respect this person, I respect their opinion, and if they're saying this, then it must be true. It's like, well, yeah, I get it. Like there's in some sense I get that perspective of like, okay, if there's somebody that I think is intelligent, I respect their opinion on many different topics, I'm going to consider their opinion maybe more than somebody else that I disagree with most of the time, or somebody that I don't find as intelligent. But it doesn't mean that you can't completely disagree with them on one topic or another. And like you said, sometimes I even question myself. That's why I have people on like Professor Richard Wolff, who's a socialist and a Marxist historian, whatever label you want to use. But you know, uh, I have a lot of libertarians on. I have a lot of, and I like to explore these ideas. I bring up Alexander Dugin. I find his a lot of his philosophies just absolutely interesting. Just a perspective and a way of looking at history, a way of looking at even the Enlightenment. He blames a lot of the issues of modernity on starting with the Enlightenment and going forward. Like, and to me it's an interesting perspective. Like that's the way we should be living, like is exploring ideas, constantly reevaluating, constantly reflecting on why do I believe this. That's something that Andrew Tate said in that interview that I didn't know this, but apparently his dad was like a grand chess master, and he's really always been around the kind of chess community. People like that, or musicians, or artists, like they have interesting perspectives because they spend a lot of time thinking, right? Like that's the power of leisure. It's this idea of like your best ideas come to you when you're kind of like one with your thoughts, when you're doing yoga, when you're going for a walk, when you're taking a shower, like when you're not constantly distracted. And I live in Massachusetts, and East Coasters are constantly distracted. I was running late because I got out of work, had to get the kids ready to go to soccer practice, which I coach. And then after soccer practice, I was like, talking to parents and answering questions. I'm looking at the time and I got to rush and do the podcast. But a lot of people, and I do my best to have a lot of downtime to spend time to reflect and think. But a lot of people live in that state all the time of the constant go, go, go. Like I never, there's people who think to themselves like, I never have time to think about like what road am I going down? Did I overreact when I got in that conflict with my significant other? Am I overstressed, and maybe that's why I'm flaring up on my kids and maybe yelling at them a little more than I should. It's, am I even happy? I know I don't know too much about your initial book, Double Happiness, but it's an interesting title, and I think happiness is, and finding happiness is probably the root cause of many of our issues. A lot of our issues in regards to being over medicated with antidepressants and all that stuff, self-medicating with alcohol or drugs, being stressed, road rage, like all these things, I think it can be contributed to us being sold that happiness is this way, is this like cookie cutter thing, that it is the same thing for everybody. And yet, like, we don't explore the idea that, like, okay, maybe happiness is simpler. You talked about like technology and like, okay, we wouldn't be able to do this, we wouldn't be, but if we lived more like our primitive ancestors, maybe we'd be happier. Maybe we wouldn't have access to as much information. We wouldn't have access to as many people. But even social media, to me, is very antisocial. Like, it's we feel like we're connected to more people, but we're actually less connected to people in our lives, because we think, because we're looking at somebody's Facebook feed or Twitter feed, that I have a relationship with this person. Well, I don't. And when we get together, it's going to feel like we're strangers, because we think we have a connection because we're connected via social media, but we don't actually have a connection. And we don't really know much about each other. And we only know what I guess we share online, which is typically, if it's Twitter, it's opinionated. If it's Facebook or Instagram, it's mostly people just kind of flexing and kind of showing off their vacations or their beautiful families or their nice cars or whatever it may be. So it's a small sliver of their life and how they really think and what they believe. And so it kind of starts sparking the conversation of like, what is progress, right? Like, are we progressing? Like, technology is progressing, many different things are progressing, but if we're not happier, then maybe we should rethink what progress is.
Yeah, great questions. Several ways I could go with that. I think I'll because we could totally probably spend a whole nother show talking about double happiness, and that's all about really the way my mind was blown by my time traveling in China, and how that made me a happier person and made me realize a lot about the power of our own personal growth. But I think what I want to talk about is a little bit just with Red, White, and Blind. I really get into this idea, in addition to the New Enlightenment and the balanced media diet as two paths forward, there's one third thing I bring up, which I think you'll like. It's what I call media consciousness. And so media consciousness is beyond just sort of balancing your different types of news. It's actually developing your mind in such a way that when you see something or hear something about current events or about an opinion, you don't just take in what it is, you're also taking it at the same time, who's saying it, what you're supposed to feel about it, who's not allowed to talk about it, right? And, what the particular issue is chosen. When you choose an issue, you also don't choose other issues, right? So if you choose to talk about the weather, you're not talking about, poverty or something, right? So media consciousness is this idea that we hone our brains to take in external stimuli from the media world, from the world, in a more conscious way. And I think it's a nice symmetry with double happiness was much more about inner growth and personal growth. And it was a lot about looking at the internal voices in ourselves, right? We have these voices from our childhood or from our parents or from school that's like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not pretty enough, or sexy enough, or rich enough to like have my dreams or to be happy, like you said, right? Because I don't have yet this thing, the perfect spouse or kids or car or house or whatever, right? And so those are important voices to look at and to meditate, and those internal voices, and to get to a point where we can question them. And when that voice comes up, oh yeah, there's that voice saying I'm not smart enough, but fuck it, I'm smart enough to do this, right? Pardon my French. Try not to use swear words, but But media consciousness is the other side of the coin. It's the other side of, I would say, a symmetrical flow, which is the voices coming from without. And what I'm saying with Red, White, and Blind is that they're just as powerful as all these voices coming from within that are like our superego and our parents and stuff, are these voices coming from without. And those, I would say, in living in the United States in 2022, those are the voices from the media. Those are the voices of CNN, of Fox, of NPR, of New York Times, whatever it is we're taking in. Maybe it's, Reason, or it's the Epoch Times, or it's Joe Rogan or Jimmy Dore, or one of these other independent voices. But by being conscious of those voices and understanding they're trying to also manipulate me, or maybe they're not, but being conscious about it, I think allows us to be aware of the most pernicious type of distortion we have in our lives today is that. So bringing consciousness to that, I think, opens up the possibilities to living a more fulfilled life. And to be able to connect more with other people that we think we disagree with. But by having media consciousness and by understanding it, it's like, oh, that's just a person I disagree with about abortion, but we actually agree about, almost everything else. Or we disagree about this one hot button topic, but we agree about all these other things.
Well, if it bleeds, it leads, right? It's this idea that like we try to demonize everybody instead of humanizing everybody. We look at what we don't have in common, and well, I shouldn't say we, it's the media would love to use that as a weapon to get us all worked up, because it's like, oh, they're the other group of people who you disagree with, they're evil, they're bad people, so you end up demonizing them, and instead of humanizing them, where it's like, okay, maybe, like you said, maybe you disagree on this one issue, but maybe you have a lot of things you do agree with. I mean, I was raised a Catholic. I am I'm not. I don't know if I don't like using the word atheism, because I feel like if you say you're an atheist, you basically say I left one group and joined another group. But so I don't. I like to be homeless in regards to the ideologies, and not really pick a team. But I would consider myself spiritual to some extent. Like, I like pondering on these bigger questions, and I believe that there's a lot about the universe that we don't understand, and I believe in that. Some of these stories of supernatural stuff could be, there could be some pieces to the puzzle of life that that we don't get, and maybe some of these things are true, and maybe it's not just science fiction or crazy people. But so myself and a religious person, it would seem to have you would assume we have very different perspectives and worldviews, but in many cases I don't. I end up finding myself actually not getting along, but maybe that's the wrong way of putting it, but finding myself agreeing with some very religious people more often than I would ever think. And on many different issues, with just the importance of like family values, the importance of community, a lot of these things that I feel like are being kind of taken away from us, and their importance are kind of minimized. So yeah, but I love that aspect of it. It's like that saying, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Like, I don't want to be around people who don't challenge what I believe. I want to be around people who do challenge what I believe, because if I can't come to the same conclusion after being challenged, then maybe I'm at the wrong conclusion, right? Like, I need to rethink it. And another great point you made is this idea of like, we're kind of told what we should feel about certain things, right? Like, so you went to China, communism. Like, you hear the word communism, you think of China. You hear the word China, you think of communism. And both words are probably words that most people don't truly understand, but yet everybody has a feeling about it, right? Vaccines, same thing. Like, vaccines, such a young age, we are told the vaccines have eliminated polio and have done all these great things in the world. So when the COVID vaccine came around, and you give them to little kids, and it's the reason why they're healthy and all this stuff. And so when COVID came around, because it was the COVID vaccine, it was a word that we already had a feeling that always went hand in hand with that word, which was like, oh, vaccines are good. that even though it wasn't a traditional vaccine, even though it was gene therapy, even though it was mRNA technology that was never, never FDA approved. And I know some people like to make the argument that it's like, oh, but they've been working on it forever. And I'm like, yeah. And isn't that more concerning that they've been working on it forever and they've never had one FDA approved? But anyways, it's one of those things where just like I feel like you said, we have to be conscious of the fact that a lot of times we hear a word and there's a feeling that comes with that word, and we didn't think it out, that feeling is swaying the way we're looking at something, and I think the vaccines, I think communism, socialism, all these things, Bernie Sanders is a socialist. A lot of people have a feeling when they hear socialism. They don't understand the, Karl Marx. They've never looked into his philosophy, his history, maybe his critiques on capitalism, all these things that I think are fascinating. And you could still disagree with them and find them fascinating. And but they've never even went down those rabbit holes because they just hear socialism, or they hear, or even from the other perspective, there's people who hear capitalism, and capitalism has only done horror. It's only done bad things because you have a feeling, oh, capitalist is bad, like there's nothing good, and like most things, like neither are absolutely right, neither are absolutely wrong, and there's a lot of gray area, and you could probably find really well thought out arguments on both sides of all the good things capitalism has done, and then you can find the other side of the argument where there's all these examples of bad things that were sparked by capitalism. So I think, and the reason I'm emphasizing this, because I think it is such a important point, this idea that a lot of times we don't realize, and this goes also to Edward Bernays and like all the things that are happening subconsciously that we're not aware of. But a lot of times we don't realize that like our perspective on something is a lot of times motivated and influenced by the feeling that we've been told we should have when hearing those things. And we have to like pump the brakes and reevaluate everything, and mostly even reevaluate, okay, what do I believe? Why do I believe that? And how did I come to this conclusion?
Well, you've just laid out a wonderful way to be an open-minded person. And the more people that approach things like that, the way that you're laying out, the better we'll be. Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I mean, I think if we can, there's a famous quote, somebody said that some people, when they find out they're wrong, they go into a place of shame and anger, and other people, when they find out they're wrong, they rejoice, and it's a time for learning, right? And, there's probably more of in the first group, but I try to be somebody in the second group where it's like, oh, I was wrong. That means there's more to learn. That means I once again, I don't know everything yet. And that means there's more that I can learn about this topic, even if it was a topic that I, wrote a book about, or I spent a huge amount of time looking at, and I missed this one key thing. And if we close our minds, and I think it's a really interesting analogy to think of censorship as being a closed-minded on a society level, and closed-minded, on an individual level, closed-minded is I don't want to consider any new ideas, and so I'm not going to listen to somebody that's on the other team or wearing the wrong color or whatever, or uses those words that I don't like. Maybe they say capitalist, I don't like that word, or they use socialist, I don't like that word. But yeah, if we can think about being open-minded as individuals and being open-minded as a society, and stand against censorship and against propaganda, I think we'll be in a great position going forward. I think you're on mute. I don't hear you right now.
I've only done like 300 episodes and I'm still messing up. But yeah, the book, I think I saw on your website that was supposed to come out in September. Is that what the original date, or somewhere I thought it was coming out soon, right? But you said we're actually a couple months away from the release date.
Yeah, right around Thanksgiving. There wasn't. There might still be a reference to September on the website. And I'm not sure if I'm breaking up or you're breaking up, but it looks like the connection. Maybe there we go. I see you again now. Yeah, so November, Red, White, and Blind is the name of the book. My website is tonybrasunas.com. You can find everything there. I'm also on Twitter, Tony Brasunas, Facebook, Tony Brasunas, and then my Substack is redwhiteandblind.substack.com. So you can find everything there. But the sort of hub is tonybrasunas.com. So if you can spell my last name, you can find me.
Well, I'll put all the links in the show description to make it easy, and so people can connect with you there. I definitely would love to have you back on in the near future to talk about your first book or talk about any of the fascinating things that I think I could pick your brain about. And I don't know if you're familiar with the other show I do, the Union of the Unwanted, but it's a awesome show. It's a big conference call of thinkers and researchers and all types of interesting guests. And I hosted with Sam Tripoli, Midnight Mike, and Charlie Robinson. So I'll have to have you on that too, because I love bringing new thinkers and new perspectives to that show. So yeah, thank you again for your time. Once well, the book, what's the best place to keep up with the book once it's released? Should they go to your website, Amazon? Is it going to be available everywhere?
Should be available everywhere. Yeah, it'll definitely be on Amazon, unless it gets censored, of course, which knock on wood, hopefully doesn't happen. Seems there's wood around here. Yeah, so Red, White, and Blind, redwhiteandblind.com. I also have, and tonybrasunas.com. Any of those places will lead to the book. Should be out at the end of November. Yeah, great to talk with you, Ricky, and I would be delighted to be on this show again with you or another. It's been a great conversation, been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tony. We'll keep in touch. Once the show's up and live, I'll send you links to all of it, and and we'll definitely keep in touch so we can talk again in the near future.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Sounds great.
Have a great night.
Yeah, thanks, Ricky. All right, you too.